Kevin, thank you for being both the producer of Close It Distributed. You and I are going to put this into production and come out with, a final outcome, which will be a book. Mm-hmm. And, you are the final keynote to really talk about what is interesting to me is that when you and I first started talking about this, you hadn't worked in this space as much. You were an IBMer and, corporate, and had done a lot of startups and serial entrepreneurship, but not thrown into the weeds of this work.
No, so, early career, I was an event planner.
So there you go.
It was back to the future because I was, I had the contracts and I called the show on headphones from the back of the room. So and I created films, multimedia. I knew how to program an AVL. So I just said, this isn't a career for me.
Right? Exactly. But you've learned a lot about what's happening in education and workforce.
100%. No, 100%. And
I think you're going to give your view now of what the future looks like, which
that's right.
Really fun.
So I'm delighted that we're going to have an opportunity to share. I'm going to, you guys don't need to see that. You need to see me. So hold on just a second. There we go. So you guys can see me and you don't need to see the remarks. And I just want to say that I'm glad to be here to celebrate what we've all accomplished during the Close It Distributed year past, right in the middle of a pandemic. We have been at this in a variety of ways for over a year. And we're a living example of the title of this talk, the future of coming together. So let me start at also thanking Jemay as she was thanking me for her leadership. Year after year, she's invested in Close It, and now Close It Distributed with me during the pandemic. I'm the newcomer. Jemay, built this. So today is a celebration of her and all of you representing the remarkable community that she's built and convened. And I'm going to paint a big canvas about the future of coming together and then fill in some detail in the foreground for the learners, mentors, catalysts, innovators, and instructors who are with us today or listening in later on. The broad brushstrokes are first to put in some background and sky and land on our canvas. And then if you listened in on my address about rebranding education, this is a companion piece exploring the learning experience and about the future of coming together as a learning experience. As a brand experience guru, that's what other people refer to me as, you need to understand my approach and philosophy about brands and experiences, and that they're deeply intertwined. In fact, I think of them as part of a two-cycle engine. Simply put, the brand invites and the experience delights. This compact idea summarizes decades of professional practice. And if you invite and delight well, you have a connected brand experience that cycles upward and creates more and more value for all the participants. To briefly refresh my earlier remarks about rebranding education, few people want to be educated in perpetuity. Yet many people want to embrace the notion of lifelong learning. Why not work with this linguistic momentum and enthusiasm for learning and substitute learning for education in most of our expressions as the brand for the profession and the surrounding and supporting sector? After I first delivered my remarks, it was pointed out to me that there was actually an effort to rename the Department of Education in the United States to the Department of Learning. It never reached a crescendo or a vote in Congress, but it's still a good idea. Maybe it'll get some momentum. So let's reflect for a moment. Do you think a large percentage of the population would spend a lot of investment dollars or taxes to fund education reform? We've kind of been to that movie before. Or what about investing in learning innovation? I think that that would actually attract the kind of attention and positive gravitational force for resources that we want. So in my experience view, my brand experience view, learning is the brand to embrace. So let's pivot now to what about the experience learning delivers? Is that the focus of our time today? Yes. The future of coming together and the learning experience and what it means for those to come together. What it means to come together to learn. As I've been saying throughout the pandemic, with the other side of it in sight, brands and companies usually only have one chance, a single moment in the lifetime of a customer relationship to make a first impression. With the pandemic and social isolation, many brands and education itself and companies have an opportunity to present themselves for the first time again, a fresh start, a new first impression for the brand and the corresponding experience. The same is true from the perspective of the learner. Away from the classroom, learners have had an opportunity to experience being together in person for the sole purpose of learning, and they're going to have that opportunity again in just a little while. So what will this renewed first impression be? Is it fully and intentionally imagined and made manifest, or is it a personally and purposefully designed experience? In some cases, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I believe that the people that we've convened for Close It Distributed have this kind of intentionality. And so gratitude for that. But in some cases, it's merely going to be the retrieval of previous patterns. And those previous patterns, in some cases, are thoughtless, uninspiring, lifeless. Do you remember going to school as a joyous experience when you were young? Something you looked forward to every day? Or perhaps you were part of the pull the sheets over your head group. Another part of experience in delivering it in our schools is sports. It's the epitome of competition and the virtues of winning. We haven't had an opportunity to do a lot of that recently either. It's just beginning to come back. I would ask you, what is the pinnacle and equally virtuous space for learning cooperation and collaboration in these collective settings? Where are we cultivating the future win-win merchant negotiators and governance ambassadors that we need? You know, if you look at why would you want to think that way? You don't have to look any further than Takata airbags. You know, here, you know, one company earlier in the supply chain did something that was kind of thoughtless and ruined an entire, you know, sector, you know, large, you know, sector of the automobile industry. It only, if they didn't share the values of the companies that were being served. So we need to have this full perspective, and we need to be able to think both competitively and in ways that are win-win. And we need to learn that way. So to get there, let's zoom out on the future of coming together for just a moment, and let's talk about something that you might not expect. Let's talk about the gross domestic product, or GDP. It's a metric and way that we describe how we come together on a regular basis as an entire country, and or wherever you live. You hear about it every day and what it means to growth and the ability to invest, and both generally and specifically how it relates to investment in learning on a regular basis, because you say, hey, you know, the GDP is moving in a positive direction or a negative direction, and guess what? We need to move away from the relatively flat GDP view to a more fulsome expression of the attractiveness of an entire economy, with learning as a key component of expressing current and future economic vitality. Let me just remind you that GDP stands for gross domestic product, and it's a fitting term for what it represents. Let's start with the word gross. I agree that this measure really is gross, as in the alternate teen slang definition, disgusting, because GDP has so many shortcomings. Yet it's talked about so often as a benchmark for how we're doing. The intended meaning of gross in this case is without deduction of tax or other contributions. In other words, the sum of the economy, or even shorter, its total. The next word in the middle is domestic, which implies the boundaries of a particular national economy. Not a fan of disconnected economies because you really can't make anything unless you trade. I agree with the words over the entry doors of the original Manhattan headquarters of IBM at 590 Madison Avenue. World peace through world trade. No economy or nation possesses everything you need to make everything, and a lot of services and experiences are now boundaryless. Trying to keep an economy bounded by borders will leave you with an economy similar to North Korea. And even if you live there, you have to do some trading. You can have a whole bunch of money and clout and still have very little to buy. Most of the people who are on the call with us today are blessed with an abundance of choices. Having choices and available in a place beats the tar out of made in a place every time. Apple talks about its products being designed in Cupertino, a designation of the origin of the idea, not a place of assembly. The same is true for learning. You want to be able to learn anywhere, anytime. Source is important. Place increasingly is not, unless you make the place a destination, a place you want to visit, live, experience over and over again. This is designing an experience worthy of place. The upside of the term domestic is that it captures a notion of what's going on for the citizens and customers in a particular place, and this indeed has merit. Finally, the last letter is product, the P in GDP. As a description of our current global economy and of individual nations, the notion of product really is out of touch. It surely does not describe what's being delivered by the sector dedicated to learning. And in fact, products are a diminishing fraction of any economy's output and is getting smaller every year. Physical production versus services and intellectual property and experience creation gets more and more uneven every year. Intangible investment rockets up and attracts resources from the far corners of the world to other major economies and permeates opportunity niches. Bottom line, GDP was invented to describe a world where manufacturing and physical production was on the rise, where education delivered a product, an obedient worker that can show up on time, know enough to be productive, but not know enough to take control of his or her own destiny. This form of education is also not likely to cultivate great citizens or statespeople. It's a predecessor economy that's the foundation for current accounting and economics, both invented for describing agrarian societies, adapted to describe a manufacturing ethos, and mutated again to describe a service economy, and now currently failing in some ways to fully describe a burgeoning experience in a tangible economy. GDP is just plain short of describing what I call intangible intelligence and what Pine and Gilmore phrase as in the experience economy, the experience economy, the title of their best-selling book. Author Joe Pine is on the board of advisors of my federation company, Content Evolution. And my perspective on what we're talking about, is informed by kind of my enterprise background. I had roles both in corporate strategy in the early days of the internet and PC, the personal computer, and the intellectual property portfolio of the personal systems group, the retail store solutions group, and the printer systems group. About a quarter of IBM's intellectual property revenue flowed through those units at the time that I was there. It included patents, licensing revenue, branding, and other forms of balance sheet goodwill. From this point forward, I'm just going to call intellectual property by the common acronym IP. One of the things you'll learn about IP and IP income when you manage it is that it has some peculiar advantages and disadvantages when you want to shape enterprise behavior, and I suspect in tandem government policy. First, if you want a business unit executive to pay attention to IP, good luck. Other than using it to do something, all IP revenue and valuation is accounted for at the corporate level. So if you have a business that has multiple operating units, the operating units executives normally don't care. Any executive in this situation with IP having no role in compensation metrics will gladly ignore it. So forget about it at a business unit level. Of course, the corporate executive team cares and the board of directors care, yet there's a steep drop off in attention and stewardship as you move into the operating units. This is a problem. And similarly, as nations, we care about IP, yet I challenge you to understand this as a metric if you're a governor, a provincial elected leader, or a mayor. It's just like the business unit leader. The cascade of interest and responsibility just isn't there. The next interesting thing about top line corporate accounting is that IP valuation is you can choose to make it what you wish. It can plug gaps in generally accepted accounting principles, especially when you're closing the books every year. Let's face it, most companies really don't know how much money they have if they have far-flung operations around the world. It's a mighty good guess at the end of the year, based on a lot of reporting. Yet to get everything to close up nicely, you need to have some squishy room to balance the books. Valuation of IP is one place you can go to get that done, and the other is the more general category of balance sheet goodwill. It's what you overpaid in acquisition for what you could tangibly account for in an audit. Here's where goodwill starts to function like mercury. Is it metal or a liquid? If the goodwill is considered a valuable asset, we treat it as a capital asset and book it as such and protect it in investment, a precious metal. Yet if the goodwill is impaired, well, then we treat it as something you need to write off, something to liquidate off the balance sheet. As I said, mercury or mercurial. Goodwill is both and a great place to plug leaks in closing the books, since it can function as both, is to either treat it as an asset or depreciate it and write it off. Convenient and purposeful ambiguity. So what about all this throat clearing that I'm doing about GDP? What would you suggest, right, as a substitute? I'm going to suggest GDE, or the general domestic experience. This is the future of coming together at the broadest level in the places where we live, the regions in the world that we live. GDE stands for General Domestic Experience. It's a term that I created 2 decades ago, and the GDE, or the General Domestic Experience, includes and transcends GDP. We do care about the products that we make. We care as citizens, all right, so much about our economy, but we care more than just the products that it makes. We care about both and. We care about all the things that we're capable of doing, both as economic expression and what we can do for each other. The General Domestic Experience, or GDE, captures and expresses what we do, the quality of life for our citizens, the attractiveness of the economy to attract more resources and talent, and discounted futures resources, which is what people believe are the prospects for an economy in question and in the future. This is akin to the way that you would bake into a stock price confidence both now and what's coming next, and the ability of that economy to adapt and prosper from it. Brand valuation is based on discounted future revenue projections, and nations and economies are really big brands. A bundle of promises everyone is collectively is or is not trying to make real. We don't have time to unpack all the features of the General Domestic Experience, or GDE, in depth, yet here are some key attributes that are part of it. Community and cooperation, education and learning, energy, environment, health, human rights, income, infrastructure, innovation, intellectual property, national security, productivity, public safety, recreation, and shelter. As you just heard, the general domestic experience, or GDE, includes education and learning as key attributes of a vibrant and attractive destination economy. So, what we want to do is we want to think about, all right, how is this going to be attractive? How are we going to create an economy that's attractive for other people to come and be new citizens? Or the journey that people are going to take via employment or educational opportunities to become, better people and have better outcomes. So we just zoomed out for a bit. Now let's zoom back into the world of learning and earning. Before the pandemic, I was lecturing at the University of Rochester Graduate School of Business in New York. One of the great gifts of my life is that the legendary academic researcher John Lynch wrote a case about me using behavioral research to pinpoint the wants and needs of people using notebook computers when I was the brand steward for IBM ThinkPad. ThinkPad is today part of Lenovo. I'm the protagonist of the case, and it has taken me into graduate schools around the world. Back to Rochester. I've lectured for Professor Mitch Lovett many times, and this was an eye-opener for me. The University of Rochester had become a destination economy unto itself. One of my classes was most entirely comprised of students from Asia, primarily China. And the other half of the class was more than half from Asia. My friend and colleague, Clark Kaywood at Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism and co-creator of Integrated Marketing Communications, the curriculum IMC with a group of us 3 decades ago, reports a similar influx of students from China, Asia, and the Middle East. Our higher education experiences are clearly world-class. Public or private, they attract top talent. The question is this: do we give people the opportunity to continue to participate directly in our economy, or at least become part of a vibrant ecosystem, or export and create a talent diaspora that's disconnected from the learning systems that we're so good at? And when we diffuse from defined degrees to artisanal collections of skills, will we continue to be a center of gravity to come get them? You should know that this is an exploration and is the mission of Skillshift that I've joined with that Jemay and Michael Brickman are founding, and we're working with others to make it real. Let us know if you want to know more and discover about what we're doing together. No matter how we do it, learning ultimately is about the transfer of human IP from one generation to the next. Now, I just invoked the term human IP, or human intellectual property. Yes, human IP. There's no other species on the planet that knows how to do what we know how to do. None can move large quantities of what they know from one generation to the next, because we have a foundationally human technology called education. We know how to pass it from one generation to the next. We know how to document it. And while the education brand is better stated as learning for gravitational attractiveness, as I said earlier, we must acknowledge that the technology of education, its methods and practices, and supporting media makes us distinctly human. It's rightly stated that all human endeavors, vocations, and advocations start with learning, standing on the shoulders of giants before us. This said, we're pushing the envelope on what we can do to move learning forward and come together in more meaningful ways. What can we do to move forward in the ways that are meaningful? Are we paying attention to how we get skills and how we get the skills we need to work and thrive? As I look back, most of my skill base, 80% of it, was not acquired through formal education or degree. It was from connection to talented and generous people, and people in obscure parts of our economy that let me apprentice, that let me be mentored, and ongoing personal curiosity, and organizations with resources that let me experiment on the edges of what's next. To provoke you, what does the learning experience we deliver today look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, or taste like? Are we designing learning experiences that are sensorily dimensional and fully human? Do we use the structure of storytelling to create an arc of interest and cliffhangers that cause the learner to want to come back and know more next time? My friend and colleague Todd Hoskins founded a company called Canopy Gap. And it works on the metaphor that when a tree falls, it creates a gap in the canopy of the forest. Light can reach the ground and new growth can appear. New life and diverse growth becomes possible. The pandemic created a gap in the canopy of what we would have considered the fabric from our previous normal lives. It tore away at the top protective layer of our collective forest. And now sunshine is landing on fertile soil. What will take root can be unintentional and opportunistic, or it can be the seedlings that we've cultivated and want to plant, or perhaps a bit of both. We should do it with our eyes and hearts open as we create a new canopy for our learning forest and create a great habitat for our general domestic experience, for the future of coming together with intention. Moving from this point forward, as you design your learning experiences and come together in new and meaningful and memorable ways, who will you invite? Who will you delight? And as we invest as a culture, who will we invite and delight? It's all up to us. And suggesting we do come together in ways both filled with purpose and in ways yet to be imagined. Thanks for gathering today. Jabay, I'd be delighted to wrap this in discussion with you and in conversation with those who've joined us today.
As always, very intriguing. Michael, I loved it. It was Department of Lifelong Learning.
Yeah.
Was that recently, Michael? Like since you left, or maybe before you left?
No, that was so there was a proposal that was in one of the president's budgets that we knew was going nowhere to combine Department of Labor and Department of Ed. And that was the name the secretary liked. I don't know if that ever became public, but
well, Ron Painter, that would have been
what she was
right.
discussing.
Whew, that would have been crazy.
Yeah, I
I
think that it would attract a lot of resources.
Yeah, I think it's a signal that, the rhetoric around lifelong learning in the US has been around for decades. You know, everybody, we have to learn how to learn through life. We've got to, but there's not been, to Kevin's point, there's not been the intentionality
right
on the part of policymakers to say, it's not a nice thing. It's not it would be nice if we could, it's a have to. And we've done some work for legislators on the Hill, and we have pointed out to them in the work we've done with them that around the world, they're not having this dialogue about lifelong learning. They're doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the really interesting examples is in Singapore, where the government put a fund out for a skills account for adults. And the first round of that skill funding, there were no parameters on what you could go learn. It was go learn.
That's right.
So the intention was to convince me and to convince other people in the Singaporean labor market, go learn.
Right.
Yeah.
Once you have the habit of learning and you understand it, then it's going to get easier for us to get intentional about what you're learning. But we just do not at the federal level, I think, put together the pieces in a way. I don't think we'll ever have a federal labor policy. I think we're going to have a national workforce development policy that organizations like, Jemay, you've always been a part of, hopefully organizations like NAWB are going to have to piece together that national workforce development policy. I don't know that we can ever have a federal workforce development policy. I don't know, Michael was there. We had great interactions when Michael was there. I don't know if he has optimism for that at the federal level or not, but I think we can achieve a national workforce development policy.
Yeah, I mean, the largest employer in the United States is the US military, right? The Department of Defense is the largest employer that we have, and it's the largest buyer of goods and services, right? And there was a task force that took place where they were talking about, what are the educational needs and what is the force of the future? What's going to be implied there? And, one of the things that came in, and the corollary is that it's probably going to be about a third of its current size, because you're going to be able to give one person a joystick, right? And they will have 500 times the kinetic strength of what a battalion used to do, right? And, it's going to all be remote and, enabled, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? You just shifted from able-bodied in your late teens to needing to be able-minded. And as a result of that, you probably need to defer bringing people into that kind of employment until they're at least 25 or 26 years old, because they need a fully formed prefrontal cortex, all right, and an understanding of consequences. And if we start to accept that, how do you now design for jobs and getting people into the workforce? There are implications for that. We once said, if you came in, and if the late 20s, if you were going to have service at every 10 years throughout your life, that you would do something physical in your teens and 20s, you'd do something local in your 30s, when you were going from 20s to 30s. You would do something at the state level when you were 40. You'd do something at the national level when you were 50. And if you had succeeded, at, doing something good or useful, then the people who were at their 50s, by the time they retire, would be the crop of people that you could choose from to be our ambassadors, okay? Because they would be, have gone through all the things that were necessary, and you would be learning, right, for the next step throughout your lifetime. Now that isn't going anywhere at the moment either, but you do see, telltale signs that, that kind of thinking is beginning to emerge.
Ron, to answer your question, you don't spend 4 years in the federal government and remain optimistic about too much about the federal government, but I am optimistic about a lot of this work, particularly where the private sector is leading and starting to rethink what it means to open the doors to more people and create signal for the skills that are needed to all the great things that Kevin's been saying over this time on this call. There's so much that's changing, and employers really need to have a voice in that. And so I am very optimistic about that piece of it.
Yeah, Michael, you didn't get to, were you on the SHRM earlier with Sean Sullivan? No.
No, I had a conflict for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. I mean, he was in total agreement that more and more employers want to do this. They just need some technical assistance. So it was really interesting discussion. Ron, my last question for you is, are you going to have any opportunity to really disrupt the ETPL, or is that just like a dead horse? I mean, ugh,
We continue to we continue to push. We're doing a lot of work with some of the tech companies, not just like implementation work, but also policy work with a number of the tech companies. It's interesting. I was talking to a staffer, Michael will appreciate, not too long ago. They happened to be on our side of the aisle, and I was chuckling to them saying, I'm really stunned that I have to explain the concept of an open market. But I jest about that. I think we continue to push that. We continue to talk about solutions are found where solutions are found. And I like that there is more conversation. I heard something a couple of weeks ago that I thought was really pretty cool. I'm going to use it all the time. And that is that the US is really a common market made up of regional economies. And I think it's the challenge in federal policy that what happens really happens, the action happens at the regional level. And that it's really to, some of the conversation that I've heard through the close it, it's that convening of business. It's that convening to name what are the skills and what are the competencies that we need. And you name some credential that set of competencies and skills. And that's really a regional thing. It's a regional agreement about what we understand this set of skills and competencies to be called. It's the point of hire. And I think that's very hard at the federal level to trust that this is going to happen at the at the regional level. So I always say to workforce boards, when I was teaching, the business school was across the street. And I used to say to students that I had for public administration, if you don't understand why you're here, you need to cross the street and go to the business school. If you understand why you're here, then we're stewards. And I think workforce boards have to continue to be the stewards of balancing what is good for the worker. How does the worker have skills and recognition of those skills that matter and allow them to be mobile, allow them to make decisions about where they want to work, at the same time that they've got to meet those regional business needs. So I think it just becomes tougher to be a local workforce board director today than probably it's ever been. I know it's way too hard. When I think about, somebody always asks me, do you want to go back to the local level? And I say, hell no, it's too hard. It is too hard.
Right. It's interesting what you're saying in terms of regions. You see collaborations. Clearly the EU is a good example, but Mercosur is another regional collaboration down in Latin America, right? And essentially, when the term Bosnia Wash, Boston, New York, Washington, that's filled in, right, and is essentially almost to the mile. I think that's short by 3 miles. I-85 that starts in Richmond, Virginia, and goes all the way to Birmingham, Alabama, has the potential to fill in exactly the same way. And I'm on that route. Okay. And it's amazing because you see the connective tissue, getting created, from Birmingham and all the car companies that are there, through Atlanta, up through Greenville, Spartanburg, where, there's BMW and all the surrounding, and then Charlotte's banking. We've got, the university complex, right? Here in this region, and pharma. It's amazing what's happening. And it's I think that you're going to continue to see that kind of phenomenon, that that those corridors start to connect, and the needs, the skills needs are part of what needs to, make the area attractive for both people to want to come there if you're part of the country, or to attract investment, if it's, coming from outside, either the country or the region. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. Jan, I'm glad you're here. I can't hear you because you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm here too. You're putting a lot of lofty thought into the room, and I agree with you. I think we are very much at a tipping point where the sun is now hitting the ground, and there's going to be lots of new approaches to old things.
I mean, because basically, the ability to have the momentum to continue to do things the way they were was ripped away from us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, that any event or any, form of gathering would go back to the way that it was, you'll find people very dissatisfied because they've learned to do some things that they actually like, right? Like, for instance, they like to participate and be heard.
Well, so what's interesting for me, the theme that that has been running through so many of these conversations that Jemay has stoked.
Mm-hmm.
One of them that keeps resonating with me is the fact that even though we're really talking about making change on a massive scale, it all has to happen in a person-centric manner for it to work, intensely person-centric, in the sense that, it's no longer, you were talking about the industrial age a while back, Kevin, where the assumption was that, when assembly lines were built, you could staff them with anybody because the jobs had been reduced to such a ridiculously narrow task that anybody could perform it, whether you had somebody with an IQ of 80 or 120, standing side by side. Ron, you talk about workforce. The layer there about this being intensely personal, I think applies very much to workforce as well, person-centric, in the sense that it's no longer okay just to look at the collection of skills and experiences that somebody brings to the table. You really need to understand so much more about the individual in order to match them with the kinds of opportunities that they're actually going to stay in and thrive in and grow in. And we don't have a good track record of having done that before COVID changed everything. So, this is going to bring a need for a whole slew of new tools and approaches and paradigms, I think.
Yeah, I know Lou sits in Pittsburgh, and one of the experiences that he had in life that stays with me, and that I think as I talk to workforce boards, I remind them, Carnegie Mellon University sits in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh. And if you ever go on the campus, when I was at Pitt, one of the things that we used to do, sadly, was that as you walked by Carnegie Mellon, you used to look at people and you would make a decision. Are they in computers or are they in the theater school? Is this a theater major? Is that a geek? But Carnegie Mellon's graduate school, which has produced a number of the folks who, drive Pixar and some of the animations, really did understand that human interaction with technology was going to be critical. And I think, to your point, Jan, even more so today, I think that we as individuals have had changed experiences because of the pandemic. And I think as systems, as learning systems, as workforce development boards, we have a huge amount of work in understanding, our own, reflecting on our own experiences around the interaction with technology, and then thinking about what do we need to be building that allows people to experience this in ways that have meaning for them. I just, can we do it fast enough? Can we
scale
garner the kind of, can we scale it? Yeah. Can we put together the kind of resources? And that's where I think, even more so, we're going to need public-private involvement in how do we do this transition. Business is going to have to help us on the nonprofit side really understand what does it mean. We're going to be doing some of this at our annual event the end of June. What does it really mean to be customer centric? It's not just sitting down with a focus group of customers saying, hey, how would you like to see labor market information? Do you want like really interactive graphs, or do you want to no, it's
Do you like pie charts or bar charts?
Yeah, do you like bar? No, it's like saying, gee, they like that. And then coming back to your staff and saying, as an organization, how do we receive information? How do we massage information? How do we produce information that has meaning for our consumer and yet also has meaning for us, teaches us about our own internal operations? I think we're in an enormously complex time for organizations.
Yeah, I was just speaking to someone the other day that was, doing hiring, and I said, are you finding that, the dilemma of hiring people who want to be paid twice? And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I went through, an era where, people would have a career and they say, and when I retire, I'm going to do this. All right. Because this is what I want. I said, are you running up against the people who are not willing to take a purpose deferment? Okay. That they would like to, have enough money. They do not want to be rich, but they want to have enough money to be able to live comfortably. And they would like to think that what they're doing has meaning now. Okay. Not meaning later. Okay. After I, do something that I actually didn't like to do, or I thought was actually, destructive in some way, but I got to do it, because I got to put the kids through school. All right. No, I'm not going to do that. I want to be paid twice. All right. Pay me the money. All right. Enough to live, and give me something that's meaningful. And she said, yeah, I'm running into those people. Those are the people presenting themselves, right? They don't just want, a salary and perks, all right? So
and shame on
designing
employers
for that's
who can't,
hard.
Shame on employers who can't cater to that, Kevin.
Right, I understand, but I'm saying we weren't using that as a design principle for the roles, right? So,
right.
Lou, any thoughts? Jump in. Cindy.
Yeah, I guess it's just a couple different things, high level, based on what everybody's been saying. I mean, yeah, I think the customer is the person doing the job, right? And the employer is the vehicle. So I do think that, and I think people across the spectrum have a different level and expectation of what that's going to look like. So in my world, it's technical people, and they have a certain level of expectation of what I'm going to supply, what I can supply to them in terms of learning and development. And I look at it like a 401k at that level. I mean, I can provide a platform, I can contribute to it. You should probably be contributing to it too in some way, shape, or form, because you're going to benefit from it wherever you go. So there's kind of a balance there. But I mean, the market is such that, as an employer, I'm hiring less experienced people at higher rates. I mean, that's just true. And then I think for the rest of the world, it's the expectation of what that condition is even going to be. And I think you're seeing people voting that by not returning to work right now. In other words, and I think there are people that have been using that to learn. And they know that there are, even if it's slightly higher paying jobs out there that they can get. So I think they're saying, I'm not going to go to that part-time job that's really hard. That's hard for me to kind of without a level of financial sustainability. It's not because they're not interested in working hard. It's just, I think the expectation is very different now. And I think that's a lot of what, the past year, I think has brought. So, I kind of look at it at two different levels, the level that my business operates at, and then the level of, where most people operate, which is not kind of in a business like mine. So I think it does come down to, we need to be thinking about that. And I know people are, but that's, to me, that's the customer across the spectrum.
Yeah, I see, when I'm studying places where, the population is sub-replacement, to, folks, is that, that there's an increasing move toward automation, right? Healthcare automation is taking, deep root in Japan right now, because, not likely to import a lot of workers, right? But people are going to live a long time and have saved for their retirement. So there's just a lot of systems knowledge that will get exported, and a lot of, if people choose to not do those kinds of roles, we'll figure out how to automate. And then we have to say, so what will give life meaning and purpose, right? And how will I make, both vocation and avocation, meaningful? I'm going to, we can have this conversation for a long time, but we're coming up to the top of the hour. I want to say, Jemay, thank you for the opportunity to work with you. Tiffany, thank you, all right, for being such a great collaborator with us. And
now we get to jump on Ron's conference. Woohoo.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah. It's been
So I
great,
look
and
forward to
there's so
collaborating
much.
in any way
I think there's
that
a
those
lot
of
of
you guys.
work that people are doing, and it's going to continue. And thank you guys for being on this last meeting until October. I'll be talking to all of you, I know. And again, thanks to Tiffany for all she did.
All right.
And
Take
Yeah.
care. See you in
Fantastic.
Santa Fe.
Thank you.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice
See
to
ya.
meet you.